So welcome to you all to this session on the Word made flesh. Welcome particularly to Jane Proudfoot, who Liz will introduce in a second. But before we hear from Liz and from Jane, just the words from John's Gospel again. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So welcome, Jane. And Liz, would you like to introduce?
Yes, thank you. So Jane's the vicar of Grappenhall, St Wilfrids, and you have been for 10 years, haven't you now?
I have.
Quite a long time. I think we got ordained around about the same time. Jane's also got an interest in funeral ministry, and I'm really looking forward to hearing you speak today, Jane, because all my students say you're wonderful. So that'll be really good. And Jane's going to talk to us today about love today. So over to you, Jane. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. Well, no pressure there then. Hello, everyone, and it's lovely to be with you. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. The title of my talk today is Love Today, and please note the question mark there. A new commandment I give to you. These words of Jesus come from John 13:24, and in full read, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. I want to start by looking at the context of these words of Jesus in the fourth gospel, and then to explore and draw out what they might mean in practical terms for us and for the church. As part of that context, we could look at the other 56 times that the word love appears in the Gospel of John, more times, in fact, than in the other three Gospels put together. But I'm not here as an expert in semantics, and I believe that an examination of which particular kind of love is implied can actually lead us down a number of blind alleys. It's thanks to C.S. Lewis, of course, that we are all aware of the fact that there were four words for love in Greek: eros, storge, philia, and agape, pointing to the four different meanings, four different uses of the word love, and four different ways that humans are drawn to others. Agape, self-giving, sacrificial, or compassionate love, has been elevated above eros, sexual or romantic love, storge, familial or instinctive love, and philia, the love between friends. Agape is regarded as the pinnacle and is embodied for the believer in the person of Christ, whose love for us was unselfish and ultimately self-giving. However, I would suggest that there are some unhelpful consequences to the rank ordering of love. Not least that it can make love deemed acceptable to God hard to attain or even beyond our reach. And the love that we actually experience and through which we make and nurture our relationships, both with each other and with God, seem substandard. But let's just put a pin in that and come back to it later. So what is the context of this verse? We are in Jerusalem, where Jesus and his disciples are gathered to eat the Passover meal. Jesus knows that his hour has come, and Judas's heart is already turned to betrayal. Jesus has a full awareness of what is about to happen, of what the Father has asked of him. John describes Jesus's existential awareness as knowing that he had come from God and was going to God. This is a seminal moment, and there is much to do and much to say. In structural terms, it's the beginning of the second half of John's Gospel, sometimes known as the Book of Glory. And it begins with Jesus on his knees, washing the feet of the astonished, embarrassed, and reluctant disciples. Jesus draws out the symbolism of cleansing and announces that the disciples are clean, apart, of course, from his betrayer. He is very clear that the foot washing is a precedent, an exemplar, saying, "For I have set you an example that you should do as I have done to you." Jesus throws his disciples into disarray and dispute when he speaks about the one who will betray him. And then, immediately after Judas has left the room, Jesus, knowing that the deed has now been done and that the cross by which he and the Father will be glorified is imminent, says, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Jesus says this commandment to love is new. But in what sense? The Shema in Deuteronomy and in Leviticus already commends and commands love as the way to go, and the disciples would have been aware of that. It can be argued that the Ten Commandments, while only mentioning love towards God, actually set out a moral code which, when worked out, looks a lot like love. In the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus instructs his listeners to love their enemies and to love their neighbour. And we've already mentioned that the word love appears many, many times in John's Gospel. What is new here is that the love the disciples must practice is exemplified by Jesus and takes its lead from him. There's a book by Francis J. Maloney, which is called Love in the Gospel of John. And in that book, he argues that to understand John's concept of love requires understanding more than what Jesus taught in the gospel. It requires understanding his actions and their implications. The action that this new commandment is immediately linked to is the foot washing, which Jesus says is an example for them. This is what the love they must have for each other looks like. It's visceral. It's not self-serving. It's humble and it's sacrificial. So when Jesus says that they must love one another, did he mean them and no one else? There are many other instances in the Gospels when Jesus addresses the disciples, and we interpret that as applying not just to the followers of Jesus then, but also to his followers now. There is little doubt that as disciples of Jesus, we too are commanded to love one another. And this requires a relationship, humble and sacrificial, an attitude of service and self-deprecation. And Jesus makes a distinction between those who are on the outside of that relationship and those who are on the inside. The everyone, seeing how we love each other, will recognize it like a Jesus badge, distinguishing his followers as practicing a love which marks them out as belonging to Christ. Was Jesus just pointing backwards to himself, kneeling at the disciples' feet? Or was he also pointing forwards to the cross? Are his words, "Take up your cross and follow me," echoing in our ears? I would argue not. Jesus speaks of what he has done, not what he will do. And immediately before the commandment says, where I'm going, you cannot come. The cross only makes sense if the sacrifice made on it is Jesus, the one without sin, the Son of the Father, whose love is boundless and whose death leads us to life. You see, I don't believe that Jesus asks us to do what is impossible. Difficult at times, yes, but impossible, no. I'm interested in how Jesus' command to love should and can be applied, and what that love looks like in our churches today, how an outworking of that love can draw us into an ever deeper relationship with Christ, with God, and with each other. I'd like to ask you to join me in a little reflective thinking. It might help if you close your eyes in order to focus better. As part of this exercise, I'll ask you some questions, but please don't answer them out loud. And I'm not going to ask you to share them at the end. I want you to bring to mind someone who has loved you. I'm not going to specify what kind of love that was or is. Simply think about that person and how their love for you has affected your life. How did it make you feel? In what way did their love change you as a person? Do you recognize the movement of your heart in relation to them? Can you recapture in your imagination the flow of love between you? Rest there for a moment. Now I want you to remember a time when you were full of love. A time, perhaps a moment, when love suffused your whole being, transporting you, lifting you, inspiring you. How did that feel? Is it possible to describe? In what way did that time of love change you as a person? How does your heart feel when you recall it? Rest there for a moment. And when you're ready, open your eyes. The intimacy and emotion of love is a personal and private thing, yet one which we share and which as human beings we need. The amazing benefits to health and well-being of loving and being loved are well proven. Physically, mentally, and spiritually, we thrive when love is present in our lives. And of course, the reverse is also true. When we are unloved and unable to love, we suffer in every way. Our hearts harden, our lives shorten, and we pass that lovelessness on to those around us. In the same way, the whole of our faith story from creation to now is a loving longing for a restoration of a love relationship between God and his creation. The Father reaching out to humanity and humanity's suffering through their rejection of his love is well documented in the pages of the Bible. Jesus, I believe, commanded and commended love to all of us so that we could have lives fulfilled and fulfilling, life in all its fullness. So far, so good. But this is where the question mark in the title I was given comes in. And I suspect that it's due to my involvement with living in love and faith and my passion for inclusion in the church that I've been asked to speak to you on this topic today. Remember that pin that we put in earlier? Sadly, we have a tendency to rank order love, to both define it and then try to refine it, wriggling around to excuse our difficulty in loving without exception. We make love intellectual rather than practical, looking down on and distancing ourselves from the physical and the embodied, even seeing expressions of love as shameful or embarrassing. When I think about being loved, I recognize in myself a response. Love draws that response from me and brings to me a sense of well-being and joy that I don't find anywhere else. It might be love from my parent or my child, love from my husband or my friend, or love from God. Each draws the same response. My heart expands, my mood lifts, I am animated and inspired, energized and optimistic. Life is better. But my response to being loved is not just about me. My experience of being loved teaches me how to love in return, and that love is not limited to the immediate object or source of the love I feel. Being loved, experiencing love leads me to love others. The love I share with my intimates, family, close friends, life partner, and with God is not containable, but spills out, flows into other relationships and encounters. The command to love Jesus, to love as Jesus loves us, goes beyond the reciprocity of love your neighbour as yourself and becomes a free-flowing exchange, mirroring the divine dance between the persons of the Trinity. It may well be, as Paul states in his beautiful description of love in 1 Corinthians 13, that the love we experience in this life is but a poor reflection of what we will experience when we stand in the presence of he who is pure love. But for now, it will suffice, and it will lead us ever closer to the one who bids us to sit and eat with him. Because love is open, love is kind, love is tender, love is welcoming. Love opens the door and invites us in. Love improves both the lover and the loved and initiates relationship and acceptance. Love offers security and allows authenticity. Love can be easy if the object of our love is lovable and fits in with our way of life. But Jesus didn't say we should confine our love. Love becomes a challenge when we realize that as individuals and as churches, love must embrace the other, the seemingly unacceptable, the different from us. I don't believe that we will be recognized as Christians because we pass love between us like a cozy game of pass the parcel. If we can love out, radiating love to those who are surprised by our welcome and by our acceptance, then our Jesus badges will be clear for all to see. No one should be excluded from the love of God, seen through us, shared by us. No one should feel second-rate or substandard. When power overwhelms love, we have failed. When self-interest and reputation are put before love, we are dangerous and have fallen into sin. When we pass judgment and forget that we too will be judged for our lack of love, we risk our souls. Jesus reserved his harshest rebukes for those he called hypocrites. What does this say to the church when it speaks of love and then fails the most vulnerable? When we look at love and call it sin, thinking that only our version of love reflects the divine, we twist on a hook of our own design. The love that we have for one another is based on the way that Jesus loved, practically demonstrated in his actions. Jesus's love was unconditional, unbounded, and radical. He loved the rejected, the marginalized, and the tainted. He stepped beyond the norms and behaviors of the time and embraced, commended, fed, restored, healed, even praised individuals that others sat in judgment on. I wonder if we are able to do the same. Because I suspect that we can look at lots of different groups and see love demonstrated. We don't have a monopoly on love. But what is it that's going to be distinctive about our loving that makes everyone know that we belong to Jesus? Now, you may well know this poem, which I alluded to earlier, but I think it says so beautifully what I want to share with you today. And I'd like to end with it before I invite questions or any comments that you might have. It's by George Herbert. Love bade me welcome, yet my soul drew back, guilty of dust and sin. But quick-eyed love, observing me grow slack from my first entrance in, drew nearer to me, sweetly questioning if I lacked anything. A guest, I answered, worthy to be here. Love said, you shall be he. I, the unkind, ungrateful, oh, my dear, I cannot look on thee. Love took my hand and smiling did reply, who made the eyes but I? Truth, Lord, but I have marred them. Let my shame go where it doth deserve. And know you not, says love, who bore the blame? My dear, then I will serve. You must sit down, says love, and taste my meat. So I did sit and eat. Thank you. I wonder if anyone has a comment or a question. Terry.
It's just a comment with many, many thanks. I was in Windham in Norfolk, and on one of the posts there were some statements. One said, God loves me just as I am. And I think that's the heart of our love, loving other people just as they are.
Thank you, Terry. I think I would agree. There's a line in Shakespeare, isn't there? Love is not love which alteration finds.
Yeah.
It's not about trying to make people like us. It's about accepting them as they are.
Yeah.
And loving them.
George has got a question, Jane.
Oh, I can't see. Oh, hello, George. I couldn't see you on my screen. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jane, for sharing so much about how we might take John's Gospel into the present time. A couple of times when you were describing the new commandment and its implications in relation to the foot washing, you talked about love being humble and sacrificial. Now, the humility, I think I can see readily in the foot washing. I'm wondering how you're using the term sacrificial and whether you could unpack that a little bit, perhaps in relation to John's Gospel. Does he have a view of sacrifice that we need to take hold of?
I think in relation to the foot washing, I would see it as an example of how we need to put ourselves to the side, to forget ego and to do things that perhaps, and go into places that perhaps we wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable with. So there is an element of self-sacrifice in putting aside pride and ego. I think to see Jesus kneeling and washing feet is a good example of that. And obviously, this whole section of John's Gospel leads us to the cross, which is the ultimate in sacrifice for us. How we live that out, I would say depends on our context and our circumstances. But we all have a tendency towards standing on our dignity and being too proud to do certain things or to be with certain people. One example, I would give you a very personal and visceral example of this. Would be at the Mission to Creamfields, which I am involved in every year. So Creamfields Music Festival, I found myself this year being chief plaster putter honourer. So people would arrive with blistered feet, asking if we had plasters, and I actually found myself putting plasters on extremely smelly feet, because they'd been dancing for many, many hours and had not been anywhere near a shower for a long time. And I didn't think about, at the time, I didn't think, shall I do this or shan't I? I responded in love to a need that was directly in front of me. And I didn't do the, oh, well, I can't possibly do that. I just did it. And I think I see the foot washing in the same way. It's feet again, isn't it? But Jesus actually being prepared to get down on his knees in front of his disciples to show them that they need to do that in the same way. Does that make sense, George?
Yes, thank you. I mean, obviously you're taking the term in a sort of metaphorical way. When I hear the word sacrifice, I always think of it more literally in terms of how things are made holy, which is what the word basically means, to make something holy, to present it to God. And I was just wondering whether that was lying behind what you were saying, but no, I think what you've done is you simply say that it's another way of describing this necessary humility, which is the expression of love. So thank you.
Okay. Jane.
Thank you. You were just talking about loving and sharing with somebody, sharing that love, and it being something that you give and there's an object to it. What happens in a bereavement? I'm sure you've got lots of experience of that, when, particularly when you've lost a child, when all that love is still there and it's kind of around you almost in a physical way, but there's nowhere for it to go. There's nobody to receive it. And I just don't know how that, what you do with that then, how you process all that love you still feel, but the object of that love is no longer there.
I think one of the ways in which as Christians we can respond in love to one another is to get involved in bereavement. Obviously churches deal with funerals, death, people who are bereaved all the time, but it's not just through liturgy that process is worked out. And yes, sometimes the object of our love is not present. I think the kind of love I was referring to was the kind of the flowing backwards and forwards between two people. But when one of those people is no longer there, yes, what happens to that love? I often say to bereaved people that just because the person is no longer there does not mean that the love is no longer there, because we are told that love is eternal, and that it comes from God. So what they have is still there. It just doesn't have a physical focus anymore. And it's part of the working through of bereavement to try to deal with that. Anybody who's been bereaved will say that it isn't just about what's going on in your head, it's a physical thing as well. And I think, going back to the Word made flesh and the whole theme of these talks, love is not, and what I tried to get across is, love isn't just something we do in our heads, it is something that happens in our bodies as well. So the yearning for the one that is loved but is no longer there is a very real physical, often pain that needs to be worked through. And often it's an old cliche, isn't it? But it is the passage of time that helps that. But it's also about connecting with others who have experienced it, talking about it, and us being able to not rush people in their bereavement, to allow them to be who they are at that moment and to feel how they feel, and not to be impatient with the progress of their grief, because every grief is unique and takes its own time. Thanks, Jane.
I've got a question, Jane.
Who was that? Sorry?
Pamela's got a question.
Pamela. Hello, Pamela.
Hi, I've got a question, and it's very sort of general, so it mustn't be too long. And in terms of churches, where do you feel they commonly fall down in terms of standing on their dignity and giving love, and what should we do about it?
Ooh.
It's a big question, so I know it's too big.
I think churches do this variously well and variously badly. And I wouldn't want to point to any particular church as being a prime example of either. I think recent reports on safeguarding in the Church of England and in our diocese are one way in which churches fail and have failed. So getting that right is a huge part of loving anybody who comes to us, comes through our doors, making sure that we are a safe place for everyone. I think we also get it wrong because we'll often say that we are loving and welcoming, and then we're not. And unless we talk to our people about it, unless we as a church, as churches, congregations, individuals within that congregation get the message very strongly that this is what we are all here to do. That's not just the responsibility of the people standing up at the front or the welcomers at the door, but of everybody, then we get bad behaviour in churches, and we get people who are not on message with the message of love. I get very annoyed with people who talk about love and then don't demonstrate it. So it's easy to say we love everyone, we accept everyone, but when the person who is different comes through the door, what's the reaction from the people there? And if it's not good, we had a lady who was suffering from mental health issues, and because of the medication that she was on, she shuffled her feet constantly and would speak inappropriately and at inappropriate moments during services, and volume control was not great, and people around her reacted very, very negatively. Despite the fact we're an inclusive church, despite the fact that I've spoken to our congregation on all kinds of different occasions about what living out that inclusion means and what it means to truly love one another, people still behave badly. But it's about dealing with that then, isn't it? And not letting it go, calling it out for what it is, gently explaining to people that they can't say that, do that, behave that way. And it's not about excluding them, but you can't allow all bad behaviour either. So inclusion is a tricky one.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
I was doing an evening on building safe cultures in churches the other side of summer, and I interviewed somebody who'd recently joined our church with a group of 5 friends, and they'd come to us as a group of LGBTQ plus people. And one of the really interesting things that she said to me was, whenever churches put up signs that say all welcome, they bracket it in their heads and to say except for you. And so it's actually specifying who we're welcoming, not just saying everybody's welcome, because the people we're actually wanting to welcome will assume it's not them.
That's right, absolutely. I've had similar conversations, so it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think people do have a narrative in their heads when they read that. They think, well, that's all very well, but they don't mean me. And that could be LGBTQ. It could be somebody who believes that because they've done something very wrong, that they're not welcome.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, if we're portraying our churches as places that are full of people who've got it right, rather than full of people who are sinners and know that they are sinners and that they need help to get it right, then we're not going to attract the people we should be attracting. It just becomes that cozy club, doesn't it? Which is inward looking rather than outward looking.
We've probably got time for one more question if anyone's got one. No takers?
Okay.
Right. Thank you very much, Jane, for that. That was really inspiring and lots to think about there as well. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's been lovely
Thank you
to
very
meet
much.
you all.
Yeah, thank you from me too, and a reminder to everyone yesterday, gives a round of applause, silent round of applause there. We meet in a fortnight's time on November the 2nd, where we have race, ethnicity, anti-Semitism. Is John anti-Semitic? And that's Professor George Book on the screen, as you can see at the moment. So that's in a fortnight's time. Have a good break, and we'll see you then.
Thanks, Jane.
Bye.